right here, right now, 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 right here, right now.
And I do believe we're
And
live.
you are on.
We're live?
You are live.
Okay, I got a bit of a feedback coming here. That's new.
We don't.
How's that? Can you hear the feedback?
Nope.
So we're good?
Yeah, man.
Okay, good. This is Ian Jacqueline for iCureCancer. I got a great guest today, amazing. Dr. Nick Gonzalez, who's like, I call him the heavyweight champ right now. He's got one of the best practices in America, able to work with cancer patients using the holistic approach, which is, in my 19 years of researching, is really the only one that people have great success with. So, are you on yet, Dr. Gonzalez?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. We got your picture up. Maybe if you click your video camera, it'll bring your video image up.
Oh, geez. I don't know how to do that. Let's see.
They're right in front of you on the front of the screen. If you put your arrow over kind of beneath the pictures of us, there should be a video camera thing there.
Yeah.
Did you guys already?
He got it. He got it. It's
Is it
coming
working?
in. Yeah, it's coming in right now. There you go.
Okay, good. Sorry.
No,
all
that's
good.
Oh, that's good. That's better. Okay. Good to see you, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Very good. Very good.
So you can see me now.
Yes, I can. Yeah, you're in a very dark room.
Yeah. You need light?
That'd
If
be
you
great.
want, it would make it a little better. Yeah.
There we go.
There you go. That's better. Yeah. Well, this is the modern technology. You're able to hang out at your crib, and I'd be able to hang out at mine, and we can talk to people and hopefully educate them a little bit in some of these areas. I know you're fairly well known. Most people know about you. Do you want to give us a little? I can tell you right now. I mean, I know you were a journalist, right? And didn't you work for Time for a while?
That's true. I was a journalist for 7 years before I went to medical school. And I ended up going to medical school because of a series of investigative stories I'd written about cancer research and some alternative subjects as well. For example, in 1972, when I was just a punk researcher reporter, I interviewed Linus Pauling, and we became phone friends after that. He was actually one of the people that encouraged me to think about going to medical school. So at age 29, with a degree in English, with no science, I had to go back and do my pre-med work at Columbia, starting from ground zero, give up my apartment, my life, my girlfriend, travel to study chemistry, but I loved it and never looked back. So that's how it happened. Yeah, I was a journalist for 7 years and started medical school later.
And what was Linus Pauling, for anybody that doesn't know, what was he famous for? What did he make?
Well, Linus Pauling is one of the few people. Madame Curie won 2 Nobel Prizes. Linus Pauling has won 2 Nobel Prizes. He was trained as a theoretical chemist, but got interested in nutrition in the late 60s. In fact, he's the one that coined the term orthomolecular medicine in 1956, which simply means using the right molecules to treat disease. And by right molecules, he meant mediators of biochemistry like nutrients. And when he gave his first speech on orthomolecular medicine before the American Psychiatric Association, even though he'd won Nobel Prizes, he was booed because no one in the academic medical world believed nutrition could have any effect on any disease, particularly mental illness. And he was talking at that conference about mental illness. So Linus Pauling rose to infamy in 1972 when he first presented his thesis that vitamin C would be useful against the common cold. In 1975, he began to talk about using vitamin C to treat cancer. And there was some initial research out of Scotland that showed vitamin C did have an effect in prolonging life in advanced cancer patients. And I was following his history then in terms of his involvement with alternative medicine. Here's a man who won 2 Nobel Prizes and was viciously attacked in the media by the academic medical community, and he's smarter than the entire medical community added up, multiplied by 1 million. But he was vilified. The mere fact that a scientist like this would suggest that nutrition could be a benefit in the treatment of any disease, particularly mental illness, particularly cancer, was just an anathema to the academic medical world. So he had a rough battle. You know, he died at 92 and never gave up the fight. And his determination was to prove that nutrition could be useful as a treatment tool for even advanced diseases and terrible diseases like cancer.
Right. Do you have a fan on or something? It sounds like there's a plane engine in your background.
There's an air conditioner in the other room. Let me turn it off. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Well, that's great because
Did that make a difference?
Yes, much better. Thank you. So, and now Linus Pauling, he put you in touch with, or via that lineage, you got in touch with Dr. Kelly, correct?
Well, it wasn't through Linus Pauling. In 1981, the summer of 1981, I'd finished 2 years of medical school at Cornell, and I'd gone to Cornell because it was associated with Sloan Kettering, and my goal in life was to spend my career in research at Sloan Kettering, investigating the relationship of nutrition and cancer. And one of my journalism friends called me up one day, July 1981, during my summer break, and I was doing some research under my mentor at that time. And she said, I met this crazy guy named Kelly, and he may be crazy, may be brilliant, I'm not sure. He had been involved with the Steve McQueen fiasco, and he was being attacked in the media. He was traveling through New York. She wanted me to meet him because she was interested in doing a book on him, but she couldn't tell whether he was brilliant and crazy, whatever combination. So I said, no, I didn't want to meet him. I thought he's just some crazy alternative guy. She convinced me. I did meet with him. We had lunch, and within 5 minutes, I realized he was one of the smartest men I would ever meet. And the next day, I was on a plane going down to Dallas to start going through his records under the direction of my mentor, Robert Good, who was then president of Sloan Kettering. And that's how it started. It started as a student project, developed into a full-fledged research investigation of Kelly's records that would eventually take 5 years. So that's how it started.
Right, and that Dr. Kelly, for those that don't know, he was actually a dentist, correct?
Kelly was a dentist, initially an orthodontist, and then at about age 35, he developed pancreatic cancer, and he had 4 young kids, all of them adopted, and he was afraid if he died, they'd end up back in an orphanage. So he figured out just serendipitously how to treat his pancreatic cancer successfully using nutrition and coffee enemas and supplements and pancreatic enzymes, and he got well. And after that, people in his town in Texas began to come to him for treatment of cancer, not for orthodontia. So his career changed dramatically when he was in his late 30s. But he started out as an orthodontist. He was a dentist by training, not a physician, not a researcher.
Wow, and then you found that you actually yourself read thousands of his studies, did you not, of his patients, and found his particular protocol to be right on, correct?
Yeah, from the day I went to his office in July 1981, he opened up all his records to me, which was really extraordinary. You'd figure an alternative practitioner would have a lot to hide. He opened up everything, successes, failures. And what I found immediately, even though I was a second-year medical student, I was being mentored by the president of Sloan Kettering. I already knew what a good case was, what a bad case was. And I found case after case, patient after patient, with appropriately diagnosed, biopsy-proven advanced metastatic cancer, metastatic pancreatic, metastatic colon, metastatic breast cancer, who under Kelly's care were alive 5, 10, even 15 years later with regression of their disease. I put dozens of these cases together in my suitcase, went back to, after 2 to 3 weeks with Kelly, went back to Dr. Good, showed him the cases, and we spent a couple hours going over them in his office at the top of the Sloan Kettering building. And based on that initial review, he said, this is worth doing a major project, and that's how it started. But there was no question from my first day in Kelly's office reviewing his charts that he had what he claimed he had, case after case, of appropriately diagnosed advanced cancer who, by anybody's standards, had terminal and poor prognosis disease, who were doing great 5, 10, 15 years later with no evidence of disease.
Right, and that's unheard of in Western medicine, from what I know. I mean, I've heard the average success for most chemos with the tumor types is as low as 3%, and with some of the blood cancers, 40-50% possibly. But you're talking, wasn't he 92-93%?
Well, he talked about having it for compliant patients, in the range of a 90%. I would say, based on my review, that certainly 90% of his patients who complied had a response. Not everyone got well, but even his failures, often, if they complied, would be alive 5, 6, 7, 8 years later with terrible disease. And they might succumb, just because their body wore out, because often they'd been treated with chemo and radiation previously. But there was no question he had a very high success rate. we reviewed his pancreatic cancer patients that he treated between 1974 and 1982. And in those days, pancreatic cancer wasn't as common as it is today. We only found 22 cases of appropriately diagnosed disease. 10 of them went to Kelly but never did the therapy because their doctors or their family said, Kelly's a quack and a fraud, you're wasting money. They never did it. Their average survival was 60 days, which is typical for pancreatic cancer. Another 7 did it partially and completely. They would stop it again because usually of physician pressure. Their average survival was 300 days, which is 10 months, which is far greater than the usual survival for pancreatic cancer. Then we found 5 patients who did it completely, and their average survival was 8.5 years. And that was unheard of. I mean, the average survival for advanced pancreatic cancer is about 3 or 4 or 6 months, even today. So back in the 1980s, when I was doing this study, to find patients who were alive 5 and 10 years later with appropriately diagnosed pancreatic cancer, unheard of. And I still follow one of those patients. He was diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic with stage 4 pancreatic cancer with biopsy-proven liver metastases. Alive in August, it'll be 31 years from her diagnosis, confirmed at the Mayo Clinic. If she had been a conventional patient, she would be on the front pages of the newspapers. But because she was treated by an alternative dentist who's, just crazy coffee enemas, it's totally ignored. And she's just a footnote to medical history. But she's alive and well, and I follow her, and she's become a good friend over the last 30 years that we've been talking.
Wow, that's great. Yeah, and it would be on first page news. So sad that we don't get that kind of attention. So, and you wrote you wrote not a book, but you wrote something that you wanted to publish showing these results, correct? And they wouldn't do it because they're like, nobody believe you, or it's like, something happened there, correct?
Yeah, after spending 5 years investigating Kelly's records, and as you said, I went through thousands of his records, I put the findings together in a monograph under Dr. Good's direction, and it was about 500 pages, and it included the first third was the theory and practice of how Kelly did what he did, the controversy surrounding his work, the true story about Steve McQueen. And then I included 50 case reports representing 26 different types of cancer, all properly diagnosed, all with poor prognosis of terminal disease, who are alive 5 and 10 or even more years later. And then I included the pancreatic study, which I just referred to, the 22 patients with pancreatic cancer that entered his office in that specified time period. And I was very excited. I thought, my mentor is the president of Sloan Kettering, the most published author in the history of medicine. We'll get this published. This is 1986. We couldn't get it published. I spent 2 years trying to get it published. And there were 2 responses. First, there were editors who thought it just absolutely is impossible, inconceivable, that an alternative nutritional therapy could be useful in the treatment of cancer. Then the second group of editors said, if this is true, this is remarkable, but it's so controversial, I'll be attacked by the AMA, the NCI, the FDA, and I'm not going to risk that. So we couldn't get it published. We spent 2 years unsuccessfully. Finally, in 2010, we published it as one man alone, updated, completely rewritten with a lengthy introduction from the perspective of 2010. And it's out there. People love to read it because the actual case reports are there for people to read and judge for themselves.
Yeah, that's great. Finally, I think there's enough light in our society now where some of these things are getting out. And thank God, about time. You're still a little dark. You don't have another light you could turn on in there? I don't know if you can see the screen.
Does that help? There's a light over here.
Okay. Yeah,
That may
that's
work.
better. Yeah, we want to be able to see it.
I'm in the back room of my apartment where we keep the computers, so that's why it's so dark.
Yeah, that's okay.
It's a lot
Thanks,
better.
man. All right. So that you found out, did you know that what you were in for when you decided to go the alternative route? Because, I mean, you were being trained, and maybe we should speak a bit about that. You were being trained to do bone marrow transplants and chemo and all that first, weren't you?
That's correct. Yeah, I did my fellowship under Dr. Good, who did the first bone marrow transplant in history in 1969, and I learned how to do bone marrow transplants, which is about as conventional orthodox medicine as you can get, about as aggressive medicine as you can get. So I was being trained to do conventional medicine at a very aggressive high level. At the same time, Dr. Good was supporting my investigation into Kelly, so I was living in 2 worlds with 2 different hats. I had a very good conventional mentor, and then Robert Good, and then my unconventional mentor, Kelly, was teaching me about alternatives in nutrition, and it was quite a learning experience. So coming out of an academic medical model, I was in a sense, very naive. I thought if you present the data, people will accept it. I never thought I would get the irrational emotional response from scientists who profess to be objective, unemotional, rational evaluators of data without any prejudice or bias. And it was quite the opposite, that even friends of Dr. Good would write these, they would read the monograph because I would send it to his friends, and they would write these irrational letters attacking me, and that I scammed Dr. Good and he was headed for trouble because one of his students, i.e. me, was conning him. And how can you make up these patients? And we actually had permission to use their names in the first version, so you could actually talk to these people. The records were there from major institutions. But that didn't matter because it didn't fit the medical model. The response was irrational, and that threw me a bit because, I understood from Kelly's life that there was a lot of prejudice. I studied the Steve McQueen episodes, saw the irrational prejudice against Kelly just because he was an alternative practitioner. Conventional doctors lose celebrity patients all the time, and they get lauded because they tried so hard. Kelly loses one, and they attack him as if he would deliberately murdered Steve McQueen. So I knew that there was a lot of this irrational bias, but I didn't expect to see it because I was so careful in my research of Kelly. And I didn't work for Kelly. I wasn't an alternative practitioner. I was being mentored by one of the preeminent cancer researchers in the world. So I thought with that kind of objective outside position that the work would be accepted for what it was, a legitimate evaluation of a very useful alternative therapy. I didn't expect the kind of backlash that happened. And I had to make choices. After I finished my fellowship with Dr. Good, I was offered 2 jobs at Sloan Kettering by professors of mine who had a lot of faith in my research. But one of the requirements was I'd have to give up this crazy Kelly stuff, and I'd have to do more conventional type of cancer research. And I turned both jobs down, which was a major career decision to make. But for me, there was no choice. You stick with the truth wherever it leads you. And I knew Kelly had the truth, and crazy as he was, because he was very eccentric. But he was getting patients well with nutrition. And my goal as a researcher and physician was to do the best for my patients and follow the scientific truth. So I turned the jobs down, and the harassment started. I was a renegade. And I was one of them. So that made it even worse. I wasn't an alternative practitioner. I wasn't a health food store owner. I was trained like one of them. Ivy League educated. All that's baloney. So there was a backlash, no question about it.
That's what's most amazing as a filmmaker when I got to get you into my iCureCancer Part 2 film is you got MD behind your name. You're trained in the oncology, in the bone marrow transplant. You know what you could be using. And you chose the nutritional approach. That's because you're a man of honor and integrity, and you have a heart and soul, unlike many of them out there, I guess, or just pure ignorance. I guess, do you agree it all started back in the early 1900s when Rockefeller, who owned the pharmacies, and Carnegie, they basically invested into the medical schools and basically changed the way our doctors learn, and that's why it's all pharmaceutical based today? Is that what our situation is?
I think that's absolutely correct. And that's not conspiracy theorizing. That's the way it happened. Right up until 1900, there were many very good, top-quality academic homeopathic medical schools in the U.S. where students would go and learn anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, but also nutrition and homeopathy, and they would go out and practice legitimately. But with the Flexner Report and the Rockefeller Foundation money, increasingly, the Rockefellers made their money Standard Oil, and a lot of pharmaceuticals are made by conventional chemicals. Increasingly, the tide shifted against any kind of natural approach, nutritional approach, homeopathic approach, to strictly patentable pharmaceuticals derived from chemicals. So there was a complete switch. All the homeopathic medical schools were actually forced to close, and they don't even exist. They haven't existed for 80 years. So there was a complete change, yes. And the Flexner Report really changed the direction of medical education from this kind of, we'll accept homeopathy, we'll accept nutrition, we'll also treat the standard conventional medicine. There was a lot of acceptance for different approaches. That was wiped out until it became just a singular approach, which is the pharmaceutical-based, drug, patentable, synthetic chemical approach with the elimination of all nutrition. When I was in medical school, other than, I was doing my Kelly research, living in 2 different worlds, but in my formal medical education, it might have been 2 hours of nutrition, and there was a joke. It was considered a joke by the students. So, yeah, there was a complete shift toward pharmacology, pharmaceutical, synthetic chemicals. And then the pharmaceutical industry, I don't know that they own medical schools, but certainly they finance professorships. A lot of the research in the U.S. is financed by pharmaceutical companies, and even the government academic research institutions like the NIH and NCI. They're basically training grounds for the Harvard Business School for the pharmaceutical industry. You spend 5 years at the NIH, you end up in the pharmaceutical company making $1 million a year as a vice president. So a lot of the people who are in government now end up in the pharmaceutical industry making very lucrative salaries.
Yeah, I know. I think one of the only time I've ever seen you smile was when I asked you during our interview. I said, "Do you think you would have made more money if you would have went into the regular?"
You get me laughing again. I always laugh when the critics, whoever these irrational critic, the only reason they can't accept that a smart, well-trained, Ivy League educated physician trained under Harvard Good would be doing this because it's a sense of honor and integrity and because it works. Now, it has to be some insidious motivation, either I'm perverse or I'm some kind of neo-Nazi physician who wants to torment people, or for the money. That's the most logical. They're doing it for the money. Are you kidding me? Bone marrow transplants, they cost $500,000 a shot. And it's easy money. Insurance pays for it, so it's quote free. And you want to be a multimillionaire, you go into bone marrow transplantation. Believe me, I was there. I saw the money that those things bring in. Every hospital in the country now has a bone marrow transplant unit because they're money makers, and it's all covered. And Medicare covers it, and insurance companies cover it. Oncologists are multimillionaires because what people don't realize is that oncologists make most of their money not from the office visits, but from the sale of chemo to their patients. Every oncologist has a room where they do chemo, and have 15, 20 people getting chemo. What patients don't realize is the markup on those drugs is extraordinary, and all the profit goes to the oncologist. Even the Wall Street Journal has done articles about that. And the oncology lobby is so strong, they've actually got regulations in place where they don't have to do informed consent and tell the patients that they're making money off the sale of chemo in their office. They're allowed to do that without having to tell the patients. So patients don't realize that there's actually a vested interest in oncologists to use chemo even when there's no evidence that it works. So if I wanted to make money, I'd be a conventional oncologist. First of all, it'd be an easier life. I wouldn't be attacked. People would love me. I would be part of the team, part of the club. I would be invited to all the fancy meetings. Drug companies would be flying me around the country. So if you want to make money, that's what you do. Doing alternative medicine, you don't make a lot of money. It's not covered by insurance, first of all, so you have to really think of that. Every time you take on a patient, you have to realize that they're going to pay out of their own pocket. It's not the insurance company where it's quote free, although it isn't free, of course. One reason healthcare costs are so expensive because the oncology budget is astronomical. I read just recently, oncology brings in makes about $112 billion a year. I'm not sure if that's accurate. I've read different figures, but it's over $100 billion a year just in the U.S. It's a very expensive proposition, conventional oncology, and that's where the money is. So this idea that alternative practitioners like me do it for the money, it does make me happy. Usually I don't smile on principle, but when you bring that up, I always kind of chuckle. It's so irrational. Wanting to make money, I'd be doing what they're doing. Like what they do is so difficult. I'm too stupid to do conventional oncology. Jesus.
Right.
Without not wishing to boast, but just to lay the record straight to their critics. And I was accepted to every medical school I applied to, from Stanford to Johns Hopkins. When I turned down Stanford because I wanted to go to Cornell because it was associated here in New York with Sloan Kettering, one of the admissions officers at Stanford called me up and said, "Fly out to Stanford. We'll show you. We'll take you around before you turn us down." Like, I'm too dumb to do what they do. No, I do what I do because it works. What they do doesn't work. That's why I do it.
Exactly. Let's talk a bit about that bone marrow transplant, because you taught me some horrifying things there, where, especially that one patient that kind of shifted in your brain. The one guy, I guess, that he blew up and he died a horrible death. I don't know if you remember the specific case, but point being is, like, people don't really know what that means, bone marrow transplant. You want to explain to them why they do that?
Yeah, people usually don't know. They actually don't know what that means, although it's used widely. When my mentor, Good, did the first bone marrow transplant in history in 1969, he thought this would be the cure for cancer. And what a bone marrow transplant involves is it allows you to give really high doses of chemotherapy beyond the doses that would normally be safe. Chemotherapy and radiation wipe out the bone marrow, and that's what often kills patients. And you're limited by the toxicity in terms of the level of the dosage, either of chemoradiation that you could administer, because eventually it will wipe out, whatever the drug is, it'll wipe out the bone marrow. Radiation will do the same thing, the patient will die. Well, bone marrow transplant theoretically gives you this tool where you can use extraordinarily high doses of chemo, extraordinarily high doses of radiation, wipe out the bone marrow, kill all the cancer, and then you salvage the patient heroically by infusing bone marrow cells intravenously. And these bone marrow stem cells have this honing mechanism where they end up in the bone marrow, which is quite extraordinary, actually, biologically speaking, and then they regrow and then the patient is saved. The only problem with that is you have to have a really genetically matched donor, or the bone marrow, for example, the bone marrow is from a donor that isn't a genetic match. As the bone marrow grows, the bone marrow produces the immune cells. The immune cells will be the immune cells of the donor, and they'll start attacking the host, the person getting the bone marrow transplant, and you die from what's called graft versus host disease. So there are several ways around that. First, you try and salvage some of the patient's own bone marrow and clean it so there are no cancer cells in that, or you get a family member or a bone marrow registry where you can find a genetically close match, maybe not an identical match, but close enough. And then you infuse that bone marrow after you use these high doses of chemo and radiation. Now, it works sometimes for blood diseases like leukemia and lymphoma, which develop in the marrow. But good thought that it would be useful for any cancer, from toenail cancer to brain cancer, because you could give such high doses of chemo. What they found is it really didn't work. That even when you gave these high doses and then infused the bone marrow, the cancer was still there. It would come back and kill the patient. And that's the case you referred to, was a leukemia patient who's about 23 years old, really sad case, who had leukemia, which is supposedly one of the diseases that responds to bone marrow transplant. And he had a bone marrow transplant, and the disease came back 10 times more aggressive, because one of the things chemo does when it doesn't work, it selects for a more aggressive clone of cells, so you end up with a worse situation. And this disease just took over, and he just bloated up like a pig, and it was horrible. And then he died a miserable death. He was in the hospital for months. We did everything we could to salvage him, but he ultimately died. There was nothing, and that was such a turnoff to me. I felt so sorry for the kid. And admittedly, Dr. Goodness Group did the best they knew how to do using the standard convention. But I had patients in Kelly that it was following at the same time with acute leukemia that he cured with his nutrition. So it was a very difficult line to walk, having to be in both worlds at the same time. So bone marrow transplant basically allows you to use very high doses of chemoradiation that normally would kill a patient. Then you salvage the patient by giving them either their own bone marrow back or a genetically matched donor bone marrow, and that salvages the patient. And it rarely does it. Rarely it works. Often it doesn't. Right. It's also very expensive because patients are almost in an intensive care unit type situation. Admittedly, with the new technologies, it's cheaper than it was when I was doing them, but it was not unusual to have hospital bills of $500,000 to $1 million for a bone marrow transplant in those days. It's still pretty high.
Wow. So, and really, they don't, down the line, the cancer's almost guaranteed. I mean, automatically, I don't think you can have children after you have that, correct? And then also, there's a good chance of cancer coming back because of the amount of chemo they gave you. Is that
well, the problem is most cancers ultimately, there's always a few of them, the cells, that are resistant to the chemo. It's like boll weevils. You can give pesticides, you'll knock out 99% of the boll weevils, but there's always 1% that's resistant, and the 1% grows very quickly and takes over the cotton patch. And eventually you end up with bone marrow, with boll weevils that are completely immune to pesticides, and with a bone marrow transplant, you end up with a clone of cancer cells that may be hidden somewhere in a lymph node. You can't see it on a CAT scan or PET scan, but it's there. And as soon as you stop the chemo and as time passes, it just explodes like boll weevils after the resistant boll weevils that explode after pesticide usage. So one of the problems is it selects for a more aggressive clone of cells, invariably with most solid tumors like tumors of breast, lung, colon, pancreas, liver, uterus, ovary. They're resistant to chemo anyway. Even if you knock out 90% of them, you have 10% of them left that are so resistant to chemo, and they're much more aggressive, and they just explode. So you end up with less of a good situation rather than a better situation. So bone marrow transplants have been very disappointing, despite the enthusiasm, particularly in the 1980s and 1990s when I was learning how to do it.
Right. Yeah, and I saw a seminar recently where apparently chemo and radiation doesn't affect cancer stem cells, and it'll kill cancer cells, the tumor, but not the actual stem cells, and those are the ones that kill you. And radiation actually feeds them, which is again why chemo has maybe a 3% success rate in most of the cancers.
That's true.
Right?
That's true. All tumors have, stem cells are those kind of amoeboid-like, primitive, undifferentiated cells that exist in all our tissue and organs that serve as a reservoir to replace cells that we lose through injury, turnover, disease, just normal cell death. And they're essential for our life because that's how we regenerate cells, through stem cells. Well, cancers have stem cells also, and their job is to keep producing cells. Virtually all chemo and radiation was aimed at the more mature cancer cells, not the stem cells. And stem cells are really quite different. They're completely immune to the standard chemo and the radiation that's available today. And one reason chemotherapy and radiation have failed so miserably with most cancers is because they were aiming at the wrong cell line. They're aimed at the more developed cells that are susceptible to chemo and radiation, but meanwhile the stem cells are perfectly happy and they avoid any damage from the chemo and radiation. Then they can start growing again. That's why so often the tragedy, and I say this sadly, not arrogantly, sadly, the tragedy of most oncologies, you get these tremendous regressions of disease very quickly, followed by an explosion of cancer. Well, that's the stem cells taking over again, producing an even more aggressive form of cancer. So chemo and radiation, you're absolutely correct. Dr. Wicke at the University of Michigan is the man who's done all that research, or initial research, with stem cell biology in terms of tumor. And he's pointed out that he's a conventional researcher. Most chemo and radiation is destined to fail because it is not aimed at the stem cells. Now, interestingly enough, the enzymes we use in our treatment are specifically aimed at the cancer stem cells, not the more mature cancer cells that we associate with the quote tumor. It's the stem cells you have to knock out, otherwise that tumor is just going to come back.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank God this word is getting out there, because I don't know how any oncologist could sit here and watch this hour-long conversation with you and I and still do what they do, because there's no longer denying it. And again, you're an MD, you've studied both sides, and you, because you have a heart and soul, shows what works. Let's get into that a little bit more. Enough of that misery, what doesn't work. Folks, if I was you, I would definitely be looking into some alternative medicine. Starting right here, what was the thing that drew you into it so quickly with Dr. Kelly, and you just knew that was your path?
I arrived in his office, which was outside of Dallas, Texas, in really hot summer in late July 1981. And that first day there, I went to work, started looking through his charts. And immediately, I remember one of the first cases I looked at was a man with acute myelocytic leukemia. It's one of the worst cancers there is. Even today, it's largely resistant to treatment. And he had some chemo at the Oxford Clinic, and it didn't work. And he ended up in Kelly's office in 1977. And in 1981, when I was doing my research, he was alive and well, and he'd gone into complete remission just on Kelly's program. He had not gone into remission of chemo. Back in 1977, there was no good chemo for acute myelocytic leukemia. He did not go into remission. Under Kelly's care, he went into total remission. And I remember the first day I was in Dallas, I said, can I call this guy? He lived in Louisiana. He was a lawyer in Louisiana. And Kelly said, sure. So Kelly called him first, said, you're going to get this call from Nick Gonzalez. He's legitimate. He's researching my work. Kelly's patients were very protective. They didn't trust anybody who wasn't part of Kelly's team. He agreed to speak with me. I spoke to him for an hour. I spoke to his wife. She told me how they went up to Kelly. They've been at the fancy Oxnard Clinic in New Orleans, one of those supreme academic centers in the South. All these fancy doctors and fancy buildings. They went to Kelly, but at that time, when they first met Kelly in 1977, he was living up in Winthrop, Washington, in the foothills of the High Cascades, where he had an organic farm, and he would see patients in town, which had 200 people. He had a single room office. They said he was in a flannel shirt and work boots. So they said they went from this academic center to a dentist in the countryside with a flannel shirt and work boots, with his hair disheveled, and he got him well. He said it was extraordinary. And they were very, very skeptical, because they were trained to believe in that. He was a very successful lawyer from an old Louisiana family. Joan, his wife, was from a very old Southern family as well. And they were used to believing in their doctors. They were not alternatively oriented. They went to Kelly just out of desperation. It's a miracle that he even learned about it back in 1977. But Kelly, with his flannel shirt and work boots, did what the Oxnard Clinic, with all their fancy oncologists, could not do. Got this guy over acute myelocytic leukemia. So when you see cases like that, again, I was born with an open mind. It's not that I'm so honorable. It's just a genetic thing. I was born with an open mind. Some people aren't. Just like some people are born to be 6'2", and I'm born to be 5'7". I had an open mind. It's a genetic thing. So I said, this is remarkable. And I would call Dr. Good and discuss these cases, and he'd say, this is remarkable. Keep looking, keep looking, keep looking. So he had the evidence. Nothing convinces like evidence. I mean, theory is wonderful. Theory, gives you dreams, and it's romantic, and you have daydreams about theory. But there's nothing like solid evidence, data, patients who are alive and well with terrible cancer. And that's what did it. It was that simple. He had the cases. He had the material that he claimed he had. There they were, right in black and white in his records. And I talked to them, and they confirmed the story.
I did the exact same thing when I first started searching on the internet about other people that cured themselves of cancer, other than my girlfriend at the time, Cynthia Brooks, who I had on the show last week. I had to find out if there was more people, and then I would call them because there's something about hearing that voice or seeing their eyes. To me, that's better than any scientific study ever. It's just, like you say, the actual proof that here you go, I'm still alive. I wasn't supposed to be. That's interesting. So what was it that Kelly grasped onto? Was it the whole alkaline thing? How did he get the enzymes? How did he figure this out?
Well, it was really kind of, first, he's a very brilliant man. His IQ must, he's dead now. He died in 2005. His IQ must have been about 180. He was a very instinctive genius, like a lot of genius. He just kind of knew where to look instinctively, almost like a psychic ability to look and research. And when he had cancer himself, he was looking for things that would help. And he was a great observer, and he noticed certain foods would make his tumor grow, and certain foods seemed to make his tumor regress. He had so much cancer in his liver, he could actually feel the tumors through his skin. So they were like a miner's canary. For example, in his particular cancer, if he ate red meat, he could feel the tumor growing. If he ate carrot juice and leafy greens and fruits and vegetables, alkalizing foods, the tumor would regress. And then he started experimenting with supplements, and certain supplements like vitamin B1, B2, B3, folic acid would make the tumor regress. Other supplements like B12, vitamin E would make it grow. So he worked out a supplement program just serendipitously, using his own tumors as a guide. It was kind of an extraordinary story. And he had pancreatic cancer, so his digestion was very weak. And he would have gas and burping and indigestion. He was eating all this raw food, and he would have constant gas and pain. So he went to his local pharmacy in Grapevine, Texas, where he was living at the time. This is back in the 1960s. And he was friends with all the people in town because he was on the school board, on the town board, all of that. So his friend, the pharmacist, said, start taking pancreatic enzymes. So he started taking them. Kelly, if nothing else, was a man of excess. So the pharmacist said, take 3 or 4 with meals. And Kelly said, I'll take 10 with meals. And he began to feel that every time he took a dose of enzymes, he would feel something going on right in the tumor, like it would soften. He said, this is extraordinary. So he started taking enzymes away from meals, enzymes with meals, 100 tablets a day, and the tumor started to regress. And then he started getting sick, and he first thought, fatigue, malaise, fever, chills, all kinds of symptoms, skin rash. He said, oh my God, I'm getting worse. The tumors were regressing. He said, my God, I'm reacting to the dead tumor. As tumors die, they give off a lot of toxic waste. Nothing's more toxic to the human body than dead tumor. And he started looking for techniques to help his liver work more efficiently in mobilizing and neutralizing the tumor waste. The liver and kidneys are a main detoxification organ. That's when he discovered coffee enemas, and he started incorporating those. And that brought him to another level of health. It helped him feel better, helped the body mobilize the dead tumor waste as the tumor died from the enzymes. So he kind of put it together like a jigsaw puzzle based on his own experience. And then he got well. And because he was so well known in the community, the local doctors, this is 1965, 66, when there weren't all these aggressive treatments for cancer, started sending their cancer patients to Kelly very quietly because he was a dentist. And he started putting them on this nutrition program that he had worked out. And then if a patient didn't respond, he'd try something else. That you and I have discussed this. So patients he found, like his own wife, did better on red meat. They needed an acid-forming diet. He'd find different people needed different supplements. So he really worked out the program based on his clinical experience. He was an extraordinary observer. He had a photographic memory, so he would remember what supplement worked in one patient in 1964 and what didn't work in 1968. And he put this all together, keeping a lot of it in his mind, and worked out his 10 basic diets, his 94 variations, the different supplement protocols. But all cancer patients took large doses of pancreatic enzyme. And he was a great reader. I mean, no one knew the nutritional literature better than Kelly. I mean, he knew it better than Linus Pauling. And he went back to the literature and discovered this book called The Enzyme Treatment of Cancer from 1911 by this unheard of British scientist who was a professor at the University of Edinburgh, John Beard. And he read the book. And in that book, Beard proposed that pancreatic enzymes are the main defense against cancer. And he had case reports from 1905 to 1911 of patients with advanced cancer successfully treated. This is 100 years ago with pancreatic enzyme. And Kelly read that book. He said, my God, there's confirmation in the literature for what I observed in my own treatment in my own office. So he put it together, kind of trial and error, like a jigsaw puzzle, serendipitously, but then went to the literature and realized, why certain foods, why certain supplements, why the enzymes might work against cancer. And there was a scientific basis that he also put together. So it's a combination of his own intuitive genius, his experiences in the clinic, and his exhaustive literature research in the medical libraries, finding the evidence going back 100 years that pancreatic enzymes, for example, fight cancer. Pancreatic enzymes have been known since 1858, and they're known today, as 100 years ago, as digestive enzyme. But Beard proposed, in addition to their ability to digest food, their main perceived job, they represent the body's main defense against cancer. And he proved it 100 years ago, but was not taken seriously. When he died in 1924, he died in obscurity, and Kelly kind of resurrected Beard's hypothesis about pancreatic enzymes and their anti-cancer effect. So it was a combination of genius and experience.
Right on. Wow, what an amazing lineage there. And now you've got all that and a bag of chips, because you are now, in this day and age, able to put it together, and that's exactly pretty much what you do at your clinic today, correct?
Yeah, that's right. We're basically using a modification of what Kelly did with the individualized diet, individualized supplement programs, large doses of enzymes, and the all-important detoxification routines like coffee enemas and juice fasts and colon cleanses and liver flushes, all of which are critical. So 3 basic components: individualized diet, individualized supplement program with enzymes, and the detoxification routines.
And the enzymes, are they proteolytic enzymes? What exactly are they?
Proteolytic enzymes are protein digesting enzymes, and Beard proposed 100 years ago that the proteolytic component of the pancreatic enzymes have the most anti-cancer effect. The pancreas produces 3 different kinds of enzymes: amylases that break down carbohydrates, lipases that break down triglycerides and fats, and the proteolytic enzymes that break down proteins into component amino acids. And Beard proposed it was the proteolytic enzymes like trypsin or chymotrypsin that have the main anti-cancer effect, although the amylases and the lipases are also useful, but it was the proteolytic enzymes that have the main anti-cancer effect. And that's what we believe today, and we believe things like trypsin and chymotrypsin. There are actually dozens of proteolytic enzymes, but we believe trypsin and chymotrypsin, the main proteolytic enzymes in the pancreas, have the main anti-cancer effect. So proteolytic just means protein digesting. In addition, they kill cancer.
And am I understanding, and they're the better ones, so that's the ones you use, or do you use all kinds of different enzymes?
The enzymes we use, my colleague Dr. Isaacs and I actually developed the technology to make them, because most commercially made enzymes we feel are not made correctly. They're based on a 1951 patent that's long out of date, but that's how they're still made. And we believe a lot of the activity and a lot of the anti-cancer efficacy are lost in the processing. So during the 1990s, we actually developed a method to make them. They're made for us in New Zealand, where we don't use any toxic chemicals. Most commercial methods to make pancreatic enzymes use all these toxic chemicals to isolate the enzymes. We developed a method that doesn't involve the use of any toxic chemicals at all, so it's really a natural method. It still preserves the activity, and they're in an active enough form that they really work against cancer. And we get them from New Zealand, and New Zealand has the strictest laws for raising animals, so their animals are clean. They don't have all kinds of hormones and antibiotics and all of that. So they're specially made from specially raised animals, and we think they're the best. Of course, I'm prejudiced, but they work in practice.
Wow. And do you sell those as well, or the people can only get it if they go through your clinic?
Well, for years, the pancreas product we used was only available to our patients because we didn't want people trying to treat themselves for cancer, but there was such a demand, people wanting them. We actually licensed the Allergy Research Group to provide the pancreas tissue. Now, because of FDA regulations, they don't make any claims for them. It's just a pancreas product, and that's all they're going to say, because they don't want they're not trying to make any claims about it and do all that. So the pancreas product from ARG is meant as just a general pancreatic product with enzymes in it.
Okay. And you're the one that has educated not only myself but many others that I've spoken to. So you did it via me. Because for most of us, and again, we're at best, we're just journalists, so we're learning the best we can from you smart guys. And for the longest time, and I wasn't the only one, but we thought you didn't really die of cancer, you died of acidosis. You died because your pH level was around 5, 4.5. And the people that would cure themselves would get their pH levels up to 7.2, 7.4. But you brought to my attention that some of the blood cancers, it could be because you're actually too alkaline. Your pH level is above 10 or too high. Is that what you're saying?
Kelly believed that the blood cancers, the immune cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, sarcomas, which are connective tissue cancers related to the blood cancers, occur and develop only in an alkaline environment. And these are people that are too alkaline, and they need to get more acid. In an acid environment, we find leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, sarcomas don't do well. So these are the patients we load with acid-forming foods like fatty red meat, R of R's, and we call them our Eskimo patients. Eskimos are the traditional meat eaters. And you get the more acid, and the leukemia, lymphoma, myeloma, sarcoma starts regressing, and they do well. And we have patients with terrible lymphoma, terrible leukemia, that have been with me 20 plus years, that have been eating red meat, some of them every day for the last 20 years. with their leukemia and lymphoma resolving. So in practice, we find Kelly was correct. He learned from hard experience. Again, he was a man who learned from experience. He was a difficult man to be around. He was married 4 times, 3 divorces. His third wife, he put on a vegetarian diet. At that point, this was in the 1960s, thinking everybody had to get more alkaline. She ended up in a coma, almost died. Put her on red meat just because he was desperate to keep her out of the hospital. It was the only thing he hadn't tried. She got better, and she still eats red meat once or twice a day 40 years later. So he learned from experience that some patients actually did best on an acid-forming diet, and that contrary to what's generally believed in the alternative world, everyone's too acid, needs to get alkaline. Some people are alkaline, need to get acid. Now, I tend to be, I'm balanced but slightly alkaline. If I don't eat red meat 5 or 6 times a week, I don't feel as well. I mean, normally I work 14-hour days. I don't need a lot of sleep. If I go on a vegetarian diet, after about 3 days, I'm ready to walk in front of a bus. People, when they get too alkaline, get depressed, fatigued, malaise. They get acid, they feel better. I have a lot of patients in my practice that believing that an alkalinizing vegetarian diet was best, went on that for years and ended up with leukemia and terribly depressed. In an alkaline environment, nerve transmission slows, and that leads to depression. I would tell these patients, go out and have a piece of meat tonight, and they would come back the next day and say, I feel better immediately. Well, they had been pushed too alkaline. They needed to get more acid. Leukemia develops, lymphoma develops, myeloma develops in an alkaline environment, we believe, and that our clinical experience confirms that.
And so what you want, though, you basically want 7. So if your pH is 10 or 11, because you have leukemia, you got to bring it down to 7. If
you want balance. Yeah, people should be balanced. You don't want people getting too alkaline. That's also a mythology. Because when people get too alkaline, they start getting allergies, depression, and they can develop leukemia and lymphoma. What you want is kind of a balanced pH. In terms of blood, 7.42 would be considered balanced, with slight changes around that. So you want, what you're really aiming for, what we're aiming for anyway, is to get people with acid base really balanced. That's when they thrive the best. That's when the cancers tend to melt away. So it's not just a question of giving them enzymes. You want the acid base to be balanced. Again, the mythology, everyone's too acid. People that are too alkaline need to get more acid. People that are too acid, they need to get more alkaline. And it's true that patients with the typical solid tumors of the breast, lung, stomach, pancreas, colon, liver, uterus, ovary, they tend to be too acid. It's the immune cancers. Those patients tend to be too alkaline.
Right. So again, you either bring it down to or up to 7, 7.2.
Yeah, in that range. Yeah, correct.
Good. All right. So that makes sense, and that's
still having a hard time with that, I think.
No. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, I know.
You got it.
He could tell I've been on ever since then. I'm like, what? No way. But it makes sense. I have talked to one leukemia patient, but his pH was low, and he had a lot of things wrong with him. And my other friend, who's going through this right now, he's keeping his daughters at about 7.2. So I think that's good. Okay. What do people, if they want to come to you, what do they have to do? Because you can't just accept everyone, right? You have to screen them, kind of.
We screen patients first for several reasons. First, more people want to do our therapy than we possibly can see, and I will not run an assembly line. I'll spend 4 or 5 hours with each new patient myself over 2 days. And it takes time to design each program because it's all individualized. That's what I was doing tonight. We suggest if patients are interested, they go to our website, www.dr-gonzalez.com. There's a section on how to become a patient. Patients have to send us their medical records and an essay. They're not graded on the essay, but telling us the history and why they want to do the program. We have certain rules in our office. Angry, hostile people out of my office. Go to Sloan Kettering, please. We made mistakes in the past. We don't want them. We want, I'm going to be working with people hopefully for decades. I have patients in my practice now for 25 years. You want people that you enjoy working with. You don't want sourpusses and people that are being pushed into it but don't really believe it. And I've had patients that contact us, and you can tell from what they write. They'd really rather be at Sloan Kettering for whatever emotional, psychological, intellectual reason. They shouldn't be with me. Faith is very important, although we talk about the biochemistry and acid, base, and enzyme. The single most important determinant as to whether the patient does well or not is their faith in their ability to get well, their faith in their therapy, and their faith in their practitioner. If you don't trust the practitioner, you don't trust the therapy, and you don't trust yourself, you're not going to get well. You're wasting your time and money with a practitioner you don't believe in. So if you really believe in academic medicine, really believe Sloan Kettering knows best, you should be there. And I don't say that sarcastically. Going to an alternative therapist takes a leap of faith because you're not going to get the support of your doctors, often not from the family. So you may be on your own. And if you have that kind of independent thinking, that independent character, this is the kind of therapy that's for you. But if you have doubts and reservations, and if it's so good, why is it in Sloan Kettering? If it's so good, why does the American Cancer Society hate Kelly? If that's the way you think, you shouldn't be here. So we select our patients, people first that we think we can help. We get calls from patients, they're in the intensive care unit at Sloan. They can't eat. Well, they can't do my therapy. It's nutritional. If you can't eat, you can't do it. There's a point of no return where your patients have had so much chemo, so much radiation, have so much cancer. We can't help them. It's not in the patient's benefit for them to come to me if we know we can't help. So we're very honest. We turn people down. That's another reason why I laugh at money. If I could set up an assembly line and be making $1 million a week if I wanted to. We turn people down all the time because it's in their best interest not to do my therapy. They're too sick, they won't be able to do it, it will only cause them stress, or they don't have the belief structure, and it's only going to cause anxiety and fear and lost sleep because does Gonzalez really know what he's doing? People like that don't belong in my office. So we select our patients it's not a question of how sick they are, how well they are. We have patients that are in my office just for preventative reasons, but they absolutely believe in alternatives, they want to do it, they're gung-ho, they have faith in us. They're wonderful people to take. We have people with Lyme disease and multiple sclerosis, not just cancer patients. So they have to believe in it, they have to trust us because that's important for them. Not that I'm looking for cult followers, but their own success with the therapy depends on their faith in the treatment. So they have to have faith, they have to have the kind of spiritual equanimity. So if we think we can help physically, if they have the psychological motivation, the spiritual characteristics that will make them succeed on the program, we'll take them. And there's no fixed rule. We assess each patient individually. Each evening, Dr. Isaacs and I go through the many letters from people that want to become our patients. And we spend a lot of time doing it because we're dealing with life and death. And we take that responsibility very seriously.
Right, that's good. And a lot of people don't know out there. The reason why you do know the odd person that cured themselves of cancer using chemo, radiation, surgery, it's probably because they believed it up here, because that the placebo effect is a higher success rate than the chemo. Like a chemo, if it's 3% on a tumor type cancer, you've got, I've heard over 20% just in placebo effect and believing you can get well. So you have to choose which one works for you. And if you were to go holistic, I would definitely consider Dr. Gonzalez as one of them. Can we talk prices, or what are people looking at if they do get in it?
Well, the first year is the most expensive with the supplements, our fees. It runs around 10 to 12,000 for the first year, and then it gets less the second year. But they're going to be on supplements the rest of your life. I don't want to mislead anybody. And the supplements can run, $800 a month. I mean, compared to chemo, which, there are drugs that cost $10,000 a month with chemo. A year in a program might cost $10,000 to $12,000 with my fees and the supplements, depending on how sick they are, how many supplements I have to prescribe. And the second year is considerably less. And, but patients, we look at cancer like diabetes. Diabetic can live to be 100 years old as long as they take insulin, follow the diet. I have patients who've been with me 25 years. They still have to take their enzyme. So once you commit to this, understand good health is a lifetime commitment. I followed the program myself for preventative reasons. I never had cancer. But you're going to be on enzymes the rest of your life. So you have to count the cost. So we want patients to be aware of that. Compared to chemo, it's a drop in the bucket. But on the other hand, chemo is free. It's covered by insurance. Ours is not covered by insurance.
Exactly. But even still, $12,000 for a whole year, that's nothing. You're looking at 20 grand for maybe 6 weeks down in Mexico. Any of those treatments. So that's a good price. That's good. Let's see, we got a few minutes left. What'd you learn in Germany? How'd it go over there?
My wife said to be cautious. She said, never say anything you're going to regret. I rarely take vacations. Vacations make me nervous. I'm not suited to do nothing. I guess I'm getting old. I don't like to sightsee. I sightseed when I was 25. I don't need to do that anymore. I took a vacation once 10 years ago. I still haven't recovered. So my wife insisted we take a few days off. So we did. We saw the Bavarian Alps. We went to Salzburg. Beautiful. We hired a guide. It was really nice. I like that. Conference was a disaster. It's interesting. I was talking about that to a friend today. There was a lot of enthusiasm about me coming. I was told by the people that were sponsoring it. It was an integrative oncology conference. People come from all over Europe. They were enthusiastic. Initially, I was supposed to speak for half an hour, which is nothing. Then they said, let's do it an hour because there's so much enthusiasm. To give a second session, I was going to speak on Sunday, give a second session later that day, and then would you give a session at the clinic of the doctor who was sponsoring it, Dr. Dowis? And I said, yeah, that'll be 2 hours. They weren't paying me extra, but I was willing to do that. I arrived at the lecture, start talking. It was an hour, and you don't have a lot of time in an hour, so I gave the basic summation of what we do: the individualized diet, supplements, beard, my investigation at Kelly, and I presented cases. A series of two of Kelly's cases, long-term survivors, terrible disease, and then a series of our patients. Two of them, stage 4 breast cancer, one with metastases of the brain, the bone, the liver, biopsy-proven liver mets in the brain. 1990, she's alive 23 years later. All her disease regressed on our program. Another one with breast cancer into the bone that developed on chemo in 1987, one of my first patients, been with me 25 and a half years, total regression of disease with us. And I was presenting these cases, and the audience is getting angrier and angrier and angrier. And at the end of the lecture, instead of, well, thanks for coming and taking time out of your life, I was attacked. It was amazing. The physicians were furious. It was amazing. I've been doing this long enough. I don't take guff. I just throw right back at them. They were angry for two reasons. First, because in an hour they didn't learn how to do my therapy. They couldn't go home to their clinics on Monday and treat cancer miraculously, get them well, and be heroes. You can't do that in an hour. I spent 2 years living in Kelly's house, going through his record, slinging how he did what he did. It takes time. And the second was disbelief, because I guess my wife said she could see that, like they were jealous, like they didn't have, they've been in practice 20, 25 years, some of these guys, they couldn't match my cases. So instead of saying, wow, this is great information, there's another way of doing this, there was anger, resentment, and my wife said, I didn't say this myself, it was presumptuous of me to assume people would be jealous of me. They're jealous because they couldn't match your cases. And there was anger, and people were stomping their fists. It was really amazing, like something out of a bad movie, their fists on the desk. So after about 5 minutes of that, well, longer than that, I said, enough, I'm leaving. So we're supposed to spend the day there. I just walked out, and my wife took me around Munich, calmed me down. So I went back. The second session later with a select group of people had come from England and from Holland just to hear me. So I met with them privately for an hour. Everyone was appalled at the behavior of the audience. In fact, I was telling my friend today, I may stop lecturing just because we're getting two kind of responses. When I lecture to lay audiences, very often there's an anger that they can't go home and do it for free on their own, which you can't treat, don't do this at home. Treating cancer, you need experienced physicians guiding you, whether it's alternative or conventional. You can't, it's hard to treat yourself at home. You may know people who've done it successfully, but most often you try it at home, you're going to hit it for trouble. And when I lecture professionals, they get angry because they can't do it the following Monday. They have to spend time to learn how to do it. So everyone wants a quick fix, and what we do isn't a quick fix. It's a complicated program, and maybe I'm stupider than most, but it took me a long time to learn at Kelly's, knee learning how to do this. Sitting at his side in his office, watching him work with patients, living in his house, going through his records, and sacrificed a lot of things to learn how to do this. So you asked a simple question, and that's the long answer. It was kind of a disaster. So
wow. I'm surprised because Germany I thought was a little more open, but it sounds like the same kind of thing you got when you started telling people to hear about it. And it's the same thing I get all the time too. If somebody hasn't opened their eyes at all yet, you're always gonna, like, didn't the first guy that said the world wasn't flat get murdered, like hung or something?
Yeah, well, it was absolutely totally. It was amazing that someone would think the world was round. You're absolutely correct. There was hysteria about that. So your new ideas in science always generate a lot of hostility. And I've been, the longer I've been doing this, as I get, interestingly enough, as I get better known, the hostility, yes, the appreciation, like from you, for what we're doing grows, and we appreciate that. But also, particularly among the professionals, a lot of resentment. And anger, and they want to disbelieve it, because if it's true, they can't do it. It makes them feel stupid, and they're top of their profession, and who am I to say I can do something better? Well, I think the world should be grateful that Kelly spent his life under enormous pressure with enormous harassment, trying to make this therapy work for patients with great success that no one else can match. And I'm not going to apologize for that. I think it's great, and I wish people could approach it with the same kind of maybe naive enthusiasm that I did when I first met Kelly. I said, my God, this is a gold mine, unbelievable, a non-toxic way of treating cancer successfully. And it wasn't my therapy. It wasn't like I was congratulating myself and I'm such a great scientist. It was Kelly's achievement. And I wish scientists could be more grateful just to hear about it and appreciate it, instead of lapsing into this irrational, emotional, unscientific adolescent behavior. It's just amazing to see where they actually stopped it. My wife said, don't tell people they were stomping the desk, because it just makes them look silly. Well, it was silly. Kind of stupid.
You might have to hire me. I'll be your bodyguard from now on.
Yeah, that's right. You'd be exactly the right guy to do that. They were getting pretty angry. But,
yeah, it's a pathetic. Go ahead.
Yeah, it was really sad. And what's saddest to me, having spent 30 years of my life, since 1981, 32 years researching this. I wish people would just be grateful for the information, the fact, they don't have to do it, they don't have to become my patient, doctors don't have to change their life to do what I do or try and study with me, but just appreciate that there are other ways of treating cancer effectively. We should all be grateful for that, not anger, resentful, not anger and resentful.
I know, it's pathetic.
It
Well,
is
it looks like our hour's up, man. I want to thank you very much. It was a true honor to be able to have a conversation with you and let others tune in, and I hope they learned something. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm still making iCureCancer 2. Dr. Gonzalez is one of the stars of it, and we're still taking donations for that at iCureCancer.com if you're interested in helping join this production, because we are basically crowdfunded on this one. We're not getting any money from Hollywood for some reason. So if you want that, that's cool. And again, thank you so much for your information. I really appreciate it, Nick.
Thanks, and I'm sorry about the darkness in the room. I guess we got that straightened out.
Yeah, no, it's good. And go to dr-gonzalez.com for Nick's site, and he'll help you out if you have cancer. Thank you, people. Peace.
Thanks.